I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid. And Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. The sons of Israel carried Jacob their father. His offspring with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters. All of his offspring he brought in with class time. We're going to pick back up verse 28. Or all persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. And he had sent Judah ahead. Presented himself to him, fell on his neck, and wept on his neck with a good while. My brothers and my father's household, who were in the land of Canaan, have come to me. And the men are livestock from our youth, even until now, both we and our fathers, in order that you may dwell in the land of Jacob, as he begins to lead out, stops in Beersheba and offers sacrifices to Yahweh. Now, in the land of Canaan for almost 150 years, because every time they settled, Yahweh tells him something special. He tells them it's okay to Egypt. Isaac is the child of promise, therefore he must stay in the promised land. So Jacob reluctance. We see he's very reluctant to even let Benjamin go with them. Here I am. And then he said, I am God. I will bring you up also again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So we see in that one phrase from Yahweh to Jacob, of Egypt. So it's important to remember that first person personal pronoun I there, as it will show up quite a bit. And the blessing already exhibited upon Jacob's household. Isaac is born. Isaac only has 2 sons, one of whom until Jacob's sons start being born. And even then it's like you have, one killed supposedly by beast. I mean, Jacob's family, as we looked at 2 weeks ago, wasn't exactly the ideal make you the father of a nation, of nations, of kings of the earth, is beginning to be fulfilled. Wives. So he wasn't even counting in-laws. So there's at least like another probably 11-ish of them. We see that, and they settle in Goshen. Now, I have a map. It's incredibly fertile. You have all the rivers forking out from the Nile, flowing into the Mediterranean. For the animals. Well, when you have green along here and desert on every other, when they are called before Pharaoh, they are to tell Pharaoh that your servants have been shepherds. Away from Egypt proper, it's also the only place where you could have actually supported a Middle Eastern. Both from the descendant from Abraham, but also the other tribes coming out of Noah. True Yahwists, if you will, in the proper sense of the word, not the weird use. Okay. Well, do you have one? Solomon's temple working back according to the biblical chronology. So we know, given these dates, by the time Joseph is promoted and comes before Pharaoh, by this point, we've had 7 years of plenty and approximately has run out of food just 2 years into this famine. To buy grain because there was none left in the land. So by the time died. So the Pharaoh who had the dreams has passed away. Now what's interesting according to the king's list. So he wasn't an old man, but before him. So Joseph is already serving as vizier of Egypt, effectively it's likely Joseph really is completely running the show. Because the son turned 18. Little known fact, Egyptians actually had the most egalitarian culture. Much of the ancient world and much of the world today. There's a young Pharaoh on the throne, and if not, then it's still his father. If you're picturing a 9-year-old on the throne-ish, in that range. So, and they're up here. So this is why it said Joseph had to get in his chariot and go meet them. And they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, as our father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the Pharaoh." And Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How of my fathers in the days of their sojourning?" And why? By seeing that Jacob is blessing Pharaoh, while it could have been and bestowing upon him, if you will, the father. Jacob's blessing Pharaoh, and that line where Pharaoh asked him, it's not that an adult couldn't. You know, because Joseph only lives to be 111. So as well as the fact that in Sesostris III's tomb, we know where his tomb is, we know which Pharaoh. Dynasty king, whom I coincidence, maybe. I don't believe in coincidences, but so, moving on, verse 7, then Joseph
not just, just in heaven, and then I like the fact that he says, the days of my life are few.
do the math again to see whether or not Jacob and Esau were born. Evil have they been? But he also says, in comparison to the sojourning of my Jewish people, the Israelites, will be brought back into Canaan and settled there. Because that's the land of Abraham. And obviously, ultimately, looking forward to the redemption. And his brothers, and gave them a position in the land. The Nile Delta is dumping into the Mediterranean, and it's a particular region up. Not too far from the site that will one day become Alexandria. Because this is a trading empire at this point. So Joseph's brothers and and Joseph provided his father and all not as concerned with 48 for the narrative, though I highly recommend it. So the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. Remember, it's a united kingdom, all of Egypt. Palestine, Canaan, the Middle East. That Sesostris III, the Pharaoh during this time, died later on. Again, there's no mention of a particular famine in the military exploits that this Pharaoh went from being a prominent and all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us food." Why did he die? In exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds. Are my lords. There is nothing left in the sight of our Lord but our bodies and our land. Why? So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians, because Pharaoh gave them. Therefore, they did not sell their land. Then Joseph as food for yourselves and your household, and as food for your little ones. And they said, "You have saved our lives. May it please." Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. That Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, place. And he said, I will do as you have said. And he said, swear to me. And he agricultural reform never before seen in Egypt. We know that previous much like medieval England. Yet those lords owned their land, essentially. The nomarchs ceased to exist midway through Sesostris III. More or less. And I'm making the case that it was a worldwide famine. Remember, in any culture up until modern history, and even point that Joseph unifies Egypt into a central, powerful government where Pharaoh land. So I just find it interesting that we have evidence in the reign of the reminds us that these were real people. It wasn't just a story. It's not a fairy tale. They were real people who were about to sons. I do want to try to work through 50 so that next wild horse or a wild donkey. Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel 40 days. Speak in the ears of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, I am about as he made you swear. So Joseph went up to bury his father with of Goshen. And there they went up with him, both chariots and horsemen. It was a company. Morning on the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is grievous mourning. Mamre, where Abraham had bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite. It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back. Please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your father Joseph, God of your father. You meant it evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive. He and his father's house, Joseph lived 110 years, and Joseph saw children to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear comments, concerns so far.
The patriarchs are buried. It's recognized by
when the Exodus happens. So he was buried with his fathers. Don't serve until most politicians don't serve until you're 110. So the likelihood over on my main notes. So I just sort of want to wrap up 12th. Is that the last pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, Amenhotep IV, last-ditch effort to prolong the dynasty. Sort of the last hurrah, if you will, of the 12th dynasty. I just testing. The entirety of the 12th dynasty's rule. Okay, which, as we know, is like an additional reigning on the throne. So it's no wonder that Joseph is given It's okay, they didn't write everything down. But to some elder statesman who had given great service to the Pharaoh, not right at the 1802 mark. Retired viziers is given that title. So we have precedent.
Father of the Pharaoh.
Father of the Pharaoh. Primarily used in ancient Egypt, given to someone who has done during the time of the famine, when Joseph is effectively running. Side, you have the 13th dynasty that begins to rule. To rise up in northern Egypt, effectively splitting the kingdom or they're reigning from Avaris here in northern Egypt. In Memphis was not an Egyptian dynasty. The Hebrew line in Goshen in northern Egypt, growing, prospering, of a Canaanite regime. Had political parties, if you will, regime changes, changes of approach. They weren't the same as the members of the 14th dynasty, so that we know that they were ruling over parts of Egypt. Mind you, the dividing line was here because you still have Thebes basically doing its concludes unless there's any final questions. If not, good. Well,